I've inserted myself here in front of Allan MacDonald, and that I think is a bit of a dangerous move to make in the first place anyway, but we'll see how this works out. And I'm going to begin, as far as an introduction, with a question for you, congregation. And it's about your impressions of an archivist. So when you think of an archivist, do your impressions include a person who hives herself or himself away in a dusty corner of an old building surrounded by old books and newspapers and artifacts of one sort or another? And of course, sometimes they need light. So, of course, there is a light. And for good measure, that light is provided by a single 100-watt light bulb suspended from the ceiling, rather like those. 3 words for that. That's not Allan. Allan is always on the lookout for ways to expose people to Glengarry's rich history and help make your history come alive. As an example, last year, in concert with the 3 museums in the county, Allan organized a series of 4 what are referred to as Glengarry Rambles. And these were guided tours of various historical sites in the county, and these must have been well received, inasmuch as Allan has 2 more planned for this year, although he says that one of them is a repeat. However, I'm pretty sure even if it is a repeat, it is not going to be a carbon copy. That said, so much for working in dusty buildings well out of the sight of the world outside, because that is not Allan. And would you help me welcome Allan J. MacDonald?
With that as a preamble, thank you, Reverend Jim, for that generous welcome. I want you to know it's a great honor to be invited back to this community that has always stood out in keeping alive the customs and the traditions of our ancestors. And it is in that general direction that I wish to offer these remarks. In late August 1966, an impressionable 17-year-old farm boy boarded the CN train in Cornwall, bound for a little-known university some 3 provinces away. My departure from the old sod on that sunny afternoon would mark a farewell to a singular way of life and a very somewhat reluctant embrace of what lay ahead, the great unknown. And as the train headed eastward, leaving behind the corn and grain fields of the Lancaster Flats, I sat back and took stock of what I was leaving behind, which was, with the benefit of hindsight, a Glengarry that would always be a part of me, root, branch, and all. My childhood was formed in the 1950s and early 60s on a middling farm in the Forth of Kenyon. Ours was a mixed farming operation, almost 300 acres in size, which was about average for the time. And in our care were some 20 Holstein cows, a few heifers and steers, a bull, a few laying Plymouth Barred Rock hens, a sow occasionally with a litter, and of course a horse or 2. And the chores, the twice daily task of milking the cows with the De La Val milking machine and cleaning out the milk stable or the cow stable was tedious and yet an inescapable task of farm life. So, unlike any other, or just like any other youngster, I was naturally drawn to any assignment that would land me in the driver's seat of the 8N Ford tractor. And it must be said that while decidedly monotonous, milking was not without its perils. For you see, the cow's tail, wiry and often encrusted, and I won't complete that, was susceptible to the vagaries of its owner, and to let one's guard down while milking risked being caught by it square in the face. And it was in this setting that I witnessed one of life's central and eternal truths, and it came without the benefit of formal study. When a violent summer storm caught us out, it was instructive to observe how the livestock behaved. The herd's overseer, the bull, would fall to his knees, bellowing in terror at the sound of lightning. The cows, on the other hand, would continue to chew their cud with marked indifference to all the goings-on. Now, this display of nature, courtesy of the cow stable, I believe applies right across the animal kingdom and undoubtedly has no little application to ours as well. The farm completely dominated our lives, and as farmers, we lived by the seasons and close to the soil. For us, the farm year started in March, when winter slowly released us from its grip. It was calving time, and Dr. Lanche, always with necktie and fedora, could be counted on to come out at all hours to handle a difficult birth. And before the cows were freed from a long winter in the stanchions, page and barbed wire fences were repaired, undoing the winter's damage. Every year, the cattle greeted their newfound freedom with evident unsteadiness, akin to merchant sailors on the first night of shore leave. They would kick up their hooves, skid about, and then come to a sudden stop before repeating it all over again, many times over. Now, my father was quite the wordsmith, and this bovine display led him to coin an expression, the spring halt. With the fences secure, the young stock were then dispatched to the pasture land of scrub and brush to while away the days until the eventual fall summons. The heavy work, farm work, spring planting, started in May with disking and harrowing, and this meant picking stones for those of us in Kenyon and lots of it, unlike these parts. The stone boat, a flat, low-profile sled made of elm planks, or as my mother would say, ellum, was deemed a practical, efficient agent in removing the endless annual crop of stones. While at the spring work, my father invariably succumbed to temptation. One of his favorite edibles, a great delicacy to him, wild onions, ramps to the more citified of us today, he consumed raw when found in a moist area of the bush. Now, as pungent and deadly as that smell was, nothing in my entire life has matched the foul odor of month-old calves beset by a run of the scours in the month of May. Moving along quickly, June marked the start of the haying season as the McCormick Deering hay mower was brought out from the machine shed and its blades sharpened. And the mowing of timothy and alfalfa began, followed by raking it up with a dump rake, later a side delivery rake. Then the hay loader came into play, removed it to the wagon, and then it was transported eventually to the mow. Making a load of hay was not for the novice. Too much of a lean in its construction, and the cargo was lost. As the days shortened and the oats took on a golden yellow, it was threshing time. one of the few tasks in the fourth requiring a communal effort. And the neighbors came over to help, and it was understood their labor was repaid in kind. Threshing day was filled with excitement, especially when Freddie DeCoste's Dion threshing mill pulled into the barnyard. And as soon as the dew was off the ground, the gathering of sheaves from the fields got underway. I drove a team of horses and later that Ford tractor as the sheaves were tossed onto the wagon from all directions and quickly secured. And after pulling up to the barn, great care had to be taken when feeding the mill because there was no margin for error. At noon, my mother gave the signal that it was time for lunch, a meal bearing little resemblance to today's rather paltry offering. Our dining table fairly groaned with an assortment of victuals: ham, roast beef, mashed potatoes and turnips, and pies. Oh, so many pies. But missing from this rather hefty lineup were salads, which would have been regarded by the crew with well-justified disdain. Now, a word or two must be said about an unavoidable tribulation in a child's life: school. Mine was SS number 9, a gaunt one-room school not quite a mile up the road. It covered the essentials in education and was remarkably free from frills. Everyone walked to school from near or far, far being a good mile and a half away from the Ruchis and the Fifth. Rarely was a day missed due to inclement weather. What passed for a snow day back then, yes, you know what's coming, meant blocked roads and the township's 80 horsepower snowplow stuck somewhere on a distant back concession. Little has changed since the school's construction in 1914. Outdoor toilets in the back, separate entrances for girls and boys, and no running water. Twice a day, the senior boys were charged with hauling a pail of water across a hayfield from a neighbor's outdoor well. The room accommodated all 8 grades, starting with grade 1, positioned right in front, noses almost touching the slate blackboard. And in a good year, a very good year, there might be 20 scholars in attendance. We played in the scrub land behind the school, where wild apple trees provided a form of ammunition. And in April, a pond came to life, makeshift rafts were assembled, and all sorts of shenanigans went unchecked and, most of all, unsupervised. Now, at the back of the classroom was an exposed box stove, which provided uncontrolled heat in the winter months. Home-darned woolen socks, mitts, and winter boots were placed there for drying. A healthy regard was given to the stove's presence. It was well understood by all that if common sense and personal responsibility prevailed, no harm would follow, and none did. The school days passed largely without event, but the annual visit of the county inspector left teacher and students alike firmly on edge. My family lived very much within our means and not entirely on the margins. We rarely traveled outside the county, and the thought of a weekly allowance for me would have garnered an uncomprehending look from my parents. Self-sufficiency was the order of the day, as we lived mainly off what the farm produced, leading to a well-stocked root cellar and a barrel of salt-cured pork. And underlying it all was our mother's remarkable creativity in the kitchen, and that got us through the year quite well. Clothes were bought, if they were bought at all, on the large size, which was considered a sound economy. And being the youngest in the family, I could always count on a regular flow of hand-me-downs. Trips to town were limited to a weekly purchase of essential groceries, and to buy jam or canned vegetables, well, that was considered a mark of profligacy. Every Sunday we attended, without fail, Father McPhail's whirlwind Latin Mass, and were spared a lengthy sermon. I'll let that sink in for a while. A lengthy sermon, and much to everyone's relief. After Mass, the town folk typically did not linger, but the farm community gathered outside to catch up on the most important currency of all, news. The Forthicinian folk had their spot, always congregating at the west entrance. And in attending so many wakes and funerals, and to have the Grim Reaper visit the farm on occasion, I came to understand early on that death was a very, very natural part of the life cycle. Like any child, though, I had my fair share of chest colds or the grip. And rather than taking me off to Dr. Dolan, my mother would address the problem with an ancient remedy, the mustard plaster. The responsive familiarity. Once applied with freezer paper, my chest was soon on fire, or so it seemed. Its eventual removal, though, required all the bravery I could muster. Now, every Friday, Danny Flero delivered the Glengarry news on his mail route, and that evening my father would recline in his rocking chair and grind his way through it with the utmost care. Another trusted source of information was the church annual report, which back then revealed all the individual givings. This too was eagerly devoured. One mustn't, though, forget in the march of technology, the central role played by the telephone in keeping a community fully informed. When the party line gave way to the dial phone in the early 60s, many lamented the loss of a first-hand source of news, and subsequently were faced with a rather difficult adjustment. We visited back and forth with relatives and neighbors such as Campbell Alec Archie or Innes Ronald Alec the Mason, often without advance notice. I listened to the conversation, but kept my counsel, as was the way. After a game or two of euchre, strong coffee, ham sandwiches, and date square cookies or squares were brought out. Like most in the Forthicinian, our home eventually got with the times. Indoor plumbing arrived in the mid-50s. Shortly afterwards, it was television, and then oil heating by the early 60s. Some of the socializing that went on took us on occasion to a modern home. I came away every time feeling rather embarrassed that my home was a cut or two well below. But I have since come to stand that view firmly on its head. I have always felt fortunate beyond measure to have grown up on a dairy farm and in this community. At an early age, I learned that life was demanding and nothing could ever be taken for granted. But growing up here was an authentic, fulfilling experience, overflowing with life lessons, and most of all, strikingly free from the artificialities of an urban existence, and for this, I count my blessings. Thank you.